about to hear a revolution in talk radio. Liberty Talk Radio.
Is the camera on? My camera on?
Your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Today, we are pleased to have a returning guest, Scott McPherson. He's been writing for the Future of Freedom Foundation for nearly 15 years now. I wonder if his pen has finally run out of ink, but he's continues to do so. He's also the author of Freedom and Security, the Second Amendment, and the Rights to Keep and Bear Arms, which will be the subject of today's program. His political commentaries have appeared in newspapers around the country. Scott moved to New Hampshire with his family in 2006 to support the Free State Project. Good man. I tell you, you got a lot more guts than I do. You know, I'm so stationary, it's amazing. You think my feet were in concrete. Well, when you listen in, you can also call in 646-652-4620. Make certain you press the 1 so we know when you want to break in and ask a question or make a comment. And we look forward to hearing from you. Scott, thank you for joining us on Liberty Talk Radio today.
Thanks for having me back.
Right. Scott, I have to admit my utter frustration with the gun issue. To me, it is incredibly simple. When the anti-gun crowd decides to vilify this whole gun issue, they take one side of the equation and never look at the other side. For example, they talk about, well, look, person A shot person B, thus we must get rid of guns, you know, especially when it's in a minority neighborhood. They don't say, well, geez, minorities are killing minorities. They just do, they're very selective. And they don't mention the fact that the guns that are being used to kill so many people within these minority neighborhoods, they're poorer neighborhoods where there's a higher rate of crime, they don't mention the fact that none of these guns are cleared or have gone through a background check. They get them, of course, people say, well, they got them out of state, they got them for illegally and all that. But this is the way things happen. If you put a restriction in, everything becomes illegal, and you not only are able to obtain the objects that you need, whether it be guns or otherwise, or drugs, but you get a plethora of it, and all the crooks make a lot of money. But anyway, there's my frustration, Scott. Please help me before I expire altogether.
Well, I couldn't agree with you anymore. There are two sides to this, but you wouldn't know that to listen to a lot of the commentary and what passes for news in this country and around the world, particularly when it comes to discussing this issue. Like any piece of technology, there's always going to be, pluses and minuses. I don't know who it was that said it first, but it makes so much sense that, we really don't, or at least we rarely have the option of choosing a solution to a problem. What we have in life, particularly in a free society, is trade-offs. And like any trade-off, technology, or like any issue, technology certainly has its trade-offs, and there's going to be bad guys using guns, and there's going to be good guys using guns in a society where firearms ownership is widespread and guns are readily available. Of course, for me, the big issue is, are people any safer in a crime-ridden society where only one side has guns? And we have certainly plenty of examples where when the good guys have been disarmed, the bad guys, either with or without weapons, then can prey much more easily on the weaker good guy. Absolutely, I couldn't sympathize anymore with your frustration there.
Well, there are thousands of people every year that are stabbed, either seriously injured, maimed, crippled, and killed every year via the knife. I mean, most people have knives. I mean, even people who don't carry a knife have knives in their kitchen. Everyone owns knives. In fact, not everyone owns knives. Everyone owns probably dozens of knives. Thousands of people every year are stabbed to death or seriously injured. How come we don't have a rule that we don't ban knives?
Well, I mean, absolutely. You point out the bias that certainly exists against guns in this discussion. When we talk about violence, when we talk about crime, people do often seem to only want to talk about particular kinds of violence and crime. The largest mass killing in Western Canada in history took place a couple of years ago, and it was a guy with a knife. He stabbed to death 5 people at a party. So, and of course, just the other day, we saw what can happen when a maniac drives a large truck into a crowd of people. Over 80 people killed in Nice, France,
right.
and over 100 more seriously injured by a madman with a truck. When that little maniac shot 9 people in a church in South Carolina a couple of years ago, President Obama came out and talked about, people with evil in their hearts and the need for more gun controls. The very next day, a madman in Austria drove his SUV intentionally into a crowd of people, killed 3 and injured, I think, over 30. So we certainly can see that people are more than capable of creating mass carnage and mass murder without access to a firearm. And I think it was Brian Doherty at Reason Magazine made a really good observation. He said, if someone is intent on committing a crime or causing harm and a firearm is available, he's going to choose the firearm. The question we have to ask ourselves is, absent the firearm, does the criminal still have the ability and the willingness to commit his crime or to commit his act of violence? And there is more than sufficient evidence to suggest that with or without access to a firearm, people will commit crimes, they will commit acts of violence, and we are no safer when we disarm decent, honest, law-abiding people.
Yeah, the pastor that if my memory serves me correctly, when a large group of people were killed in a church. In that church, the pastor did not allow firearms in his church.
I think you might be right about that. And what's interesting about that is within a couple of days, there was a pastor of a black church in North Carolina, the state, obviously just to the north of South Carolina, who announced that there would, from that day forward, there would be one additional parishioner in his services every Sunday, and it would be Smith & Wesson.
That's right. And now, if I was the preacher, I'd say you can belong to this congregation, but you must be packing heat when you walk in.
Sure.
I mean, if people knew that, the people who conduct these, these mass murders don't have their heads screwed on right. But if one thing they know, they don't want to get hurt. They want to hurt other people. I mean, if they know that if they walk in and they pull a gun, they're going to be Swiss cheese, most likely they wouldn't do it. So it's perfectly logical. What bothers me is that we have elected officials who are gun advocates, Second Amendment advocates, and they never make a logical, rational counter to what Barack Obama or the anti-gun lobby says. They never come out with something logical. They just say, well, we have to protect our rights, under the Second Amendment, which I agree with. But they never give people the reason why it's logical that we do that. Why in Switzerland, every person who's a citizen must have a gun, must know how to use it. They must have a fire alarm in a house. And of course, when came time for Hitler to take over Europe, he took over Europe except for Switzerland, because he knew that he drove his tanks down the streets. Eventually, those guys had to get out of the tanks to go to the bathroom, and when did, they got picked off. I mean, they said, thank you, but no thank you. We'll go to Austria, or we'll go to to Poland, or But we never use any. Why don't we use logic? Why don't we use these arguments? The arguments we hear are lame.
Oh, I agree. You mentioned earlier today that, there's a lot of outcry about the high rates of violence, and particularly in some minority inner city communities. And it's interesting that that we hear so little about that from the anti-gun side of the argument. President Obama is from Chicago, his home city, which is a model for the kinds of gun controls he would like to see imposed nationwide. And I believe there's a black man killed in Chicago. I think it's estimated every 14 hours, almost 2 per day in the utopia of gun-controlled Chicago. But yet in a state like, and I should point out too that it's extremely difficult for law-abiding people to get, and certainly extremely difficult for them to have the legal ability to carry a firearm for their own protection in a city like Chicago. But yet right next door in Aurora, the neighboring city of Aurora, Illinois, it's not uncommon for that city to experience 0 homicides in the course of a year. Now, obviously, we're talking about a huge disparity in population between the two cities, but there's a lot more at work when you can have such a tremendous or such a high number of homicides in one area and 0 or virtually 0 homicides in others. New Hampshire is a great example. Northern New England is a great example. New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine have extremely high rates of firearms ownership, at or above the national average, and yet we're routinely considered the safest states in the union. So if guns cause crime or if guns kill people, mine must be broken. And a lot of people up here must also have broken guns, because the crime and the homicide rates not just in northern New England, but in many states with extremely high percentages of legal firearms owners are very low, extremely low, and certainly lower than in those areas where people are forbidden to own or carry firearms. And of course, the counter is always, well, as you said, somebody's leaving the area where it's illegal, going to the area where it's legal, buying the gun, and then returning. Well, that is illegal, so they're breaking the law. And then, of course, that begs the question of why there aren't these horrifically high levels of homicide in the areas where the guns are legal and readily available.
Yeah. Well, Hillary Clinton always brings up the point that they go, oh, the reason why the rate of murders and deaths via guns are so bad in Chicago is because the guns come from outside of Chicago. Really, gun control works within Chicago. It's just that these bad guys from outside of Chicago come in and people get the guns and then they use them. So that's why we have to have total gun control over the whole nation. Well, where are these clowns on the other side? And I call them clowns because they don't think. Plano, Texas. Now, I'm an East Harlem boy. I was born in the ghettos and the streets of New York City, East Harlem. I got the crap beat out of me on a regular basis. I mean, no one was happy unless I was bleeding on the floor. I sang doo-wop back in the 50s in the South Bronx. We're talking tough neighborhoods. So I'm not some rosy kid, from this highfalutin neighborhood or gated community. I'm a street kid from New York. So I understand Chicago, New York, and quite frankly, I feel very comfortable in those. I feel more comfortable walking the streets of inner city, because I was born there, than I do when I'm walking in suburbia. I'll be honest with you. Now, why don't these people who are gun advocates, the Second Amendment advocates, say, hey, in Plano, Texas, is the highest ratio of guns per capita in the United States. There's no place that has more guns per capita than Plano, Texas. And at the same time, the lowest incidence of gun crime is lowest in the United States in Plano, Texas. One statistic ends all the way out. Now, and not only that, but if you're outside of Plano, Texas, and you want to bring guns in Plano, Texas, bring them, please. We'll buy them, I only have 72 firearms in my house. I have room for more. And yet we never use a good argument. We just say, well, it's our Second Amendment right. And then they say, well, you're reading the Constitution wrong. Forget the Constitution. Forget all that. It's our inalienable right to own whatever we want, provided we do not inflict any harm upon anybody else, period.
Well, I agree. And there was a sit-in in Congress. Some members of Congress were protesting their inability to force a vote and a debate on proposed gun control laws. And personally, I wish that debate had taken place. It seems to me as if it's sort of like the so-called global climate change debate. The debate. It's declared over, and allegedly we lost the argument, and so now we all need to sit down and shut up and let them pass all the gun control that they want. Well, I say no. This debate is far from over, and I was actually in support of those who were demanding a debate and a vote on these gun bills. One, because like you, I think that it's time that those who claim to be pro-Second Amendment actually stand up and explain exactly why. And two, I want those bastards on the record, especially in an election year.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to offer you a solution to this whole gun problem. And there'll be no more controversy after this. And I'm going to give it to you, and you can run with it. How about that?
Right.
And I won't charge you a dime, absolutely free of charge. Here it is. All right? Let's impose gun confiscation. We have a bill, we impose gun confiscation, but it's got to be done this way. The first guns we confiscate is from all of the politicians and all of the people who are purportedly protecting the politicians, all their bodyguards. All those guns have to go.
Yep.
All right, we do it step.
Start with them. I like that idea.
Take them all. I want to see them all not destroyed. I'd like to buy some of them, but they got pretty the best firearms. I'll take a few of them. But take them all away. Now, once you mention that, all of a sudden you get the oh no, wait a minute. It's necessary. I'm a senator or anything. I am afforded. I need to be protected. Well, no, you're a civil servant. You're my servant. I'm the one that has the guns, not the servant. In other words, we can turn this upside down, and yet we don't have one brain cell in the entire Congress that could come up with something like that as a valid argument, and I think that's absolutely valid. And then after that, we can say, fine, the second thing, we take all the guns away from the military. Because we bring and the reason for that, we bring all our troops home. All the bases are closed, all the military stays home, and they have guns, but they only have them when we go to war. If someone is invading us, then they can have their guns,
Sure.
And I can go down the list. The list goes pretty far down. And now the last person that has to give up their guns. Me. That's right. Me. I'm last. But they want me to go first. Screw them. I'm paying their salary, and they're taking my gun away. I think we got this upside down.
I agree. And it's interesting. You mentioned earlier the failure of so many of those who claim to be pro-Second Amendment, particularly public officials, to actually stand up and actually make a case. What's interesting about that is recently it's been people that are historically more on the left that are making that case for us. Howard Stern recently came out and argued with someone very passionately on his show, basically making the simple case that if I'm disarmed and someone attacks me, I have no ability to defend myself. People like Bill Maher, who's very much on the left side of the political spectrum, has come out in the last couple of years and admitted, I am a gun owner. I want to be able to protect myself.
Me? I didn't know that.
No, please don't misunderstand me. I'm sure that he would be the first in line to support a lot of these gun control proposals that are being made. But yet these people are nonetheless coming out and admitting that they are gun owners, that they support the right to own guns, and they make the case that they and others should have the right to defend themselves. So it's really kind of in a sense, it's a battle that we're winning when so many people on the other side are actually coming out and agreeing with us. But of course, one of the arguments I would most like to see made, and I would like to see it made more often, is to look at those countries that have banned firearms and ask a simple question: are people there safer than they were before the firearms were banned? Now, some examples would sort of might not quite fit that mold so well. Like, for example, Australia banned its firearms, and people say that the homicide rate went down there. Well, what they don't tell you about that is that the homicide rate was going down already. Meanwhile, in nearby New Zealand, Australia's neighbor did not impose extreme gun control and confiscation, and New Zealand is not exactly overrun with crime. But yet we have countries like, for example, Russia, where under communism, crimes were rarely committed. Homicides were rarely committed with firearms in Russia. Nobody had a gun, but yet their homicide rate dwarfed our. I mean, ours is insignificant compared to the Soviet Union's at its peak. Brazil, another large country, 200 million people in Brazil, very few legally owned firearms. Their homicide rate currently stands at 27 per 100,000 people. Compare that to ours at about 4.5 per 100,000. Their rape rate is out of control. So England, and again, and I think England is the classic example. Here you have a country that has historically always had a very low crime rate, always had an extremely low homicide rate, completely bans ownership of handguns in 1997, and their crime rate explodes. Now, when you talk to an English person, they're always quick to point out, well, we got that under control. It's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still higher than it was.
Right.
So you are still less safe in England than you were before handguns were banned.
Yeah. Well, in Mexico, automatic weapons are rampant, but our government is really financing it through the war on drugs. I mean, we finance wars around the world, give people guns, and some of the people who are committing crimes with guns are people who have been taught, who are nice guys, nice young men that we taught to kill.
Yes.
We teach people to kill. And what? How would they go in the army? But not to defend the country. We teach them to kill, to be able to say, to take an order and say, you see that guy with the black headband or the white headband or whatever the case may be, shoot him and shoot everyone around him. We teach people how to kill and to kill other people. And that's why most of them, when they come back, they're just wacko in the head because they realize they've killed people that they were not of any harm, causing any harm to them. They were just following orders. So the U.S. government is the biggest perpetrator of crime, not only in the United States, but around the world. And then we finance the other side through the war on drugs and other programs.
Sure. Well, yeah, exactly. And one of those other programs is the Fast and Furious program. One of the weapons used, interestingly enough, we hear a lot about the weapon that was used to kill, or the weapons that were used to kill 2 Border Patrol agents got into the hands of Mexican cartels through the Fast and Furious program. What you don't hear, strangely, what we're not hearing more about is that there was actually a weapon from the Fast and Furious program that was used in the Paris massacre several months ago. So, our government seems more than happy, whether it's putting weapons in the hands of foreign drug cartels, or putting weapons in the hands of foreign terrorists, or putting weapons in the hands of our own men and women who then go off to other lands to kill people. Our government doesn't seem to have much of a problem with gun violence. To be honest, they really don't have much of a problem with it at all. They seem to be quite content with gun violence. They just don't want you or I to be able to own a gun.
Yeah, but the mockery of the whole thing. We ship thousands of guns every year to groups that we consider to be sympathetic to the United States or friendly to the United States, and not really friendly in that they're playing our game. So we supply them with guns. I mean, high-powered guns I can't even get a hold of here in the United States, to kill other people, many of whom are innocent. The blood is on our hands, and yet we say we're the bastion of peace and security and whatever. I mean, how much hypocrisy can we get before we just explode from within? And why aren't these clowns in Congress and in the Senate, why aren't they saying, hey, why are we being so hypocritical? They're not saying anything. All they do is they sort of answer back in a very vanilla fashion, saying it's our constitutional right, so I'm not going to give up that. And they have no real meat behind their arguments. They never give a reason why. They just stand by the Constitution. And then on everything else, they violate the Constitution. So they discredit themselves while they're speaking.
Well, I'm no fan of Donald Trump, so please don't interpret what I'm about to say is in any way an endorsement of him or his campaign for the presidency. But I will say that to his credit, he's come out several times and spoken about not just the need for people to, or not just the right of people to carry handguns for their own protection, but the need for them to do so. He's been at the forefront after these situations like in Nice and in Paris and in San Bernardino and in Orlando, talking about how perhaps we need some people on the other side that are shooting back. So it's happening. I think slowly we're seeing more people that are kind of offering more of a substantive meat for the or grist for the mill, we might say. But I agree with you. I would like to see those who are claiming to be pro Second Amendment and pro gun and pro self-defense actually standing up in Congress and in our state legislatures and making a better case for that. Why they're not doing so, I really don't have any idea. I'm routinely astounded at the well, first of all, that's actually not that difficult to understand. We're talking about politicians here who are not the deepest people in the world. They're some of the shallowest, and to be really fair, when you meet them, they're really not very intelligent people for the most part. I mean, in democracy, it's not the best. It's the scum that rises to the top. It's the guy that can appeal to the lowest common denominator. So we're not talking about brain surgeons here. Brain surgeons don't become president. They become brain surgeons. Scumbags become president by and large, and I think the same goes with congressmen and senators, and I think our state legislatures are largely filled with some of these same kinds of people.
Yeah, but you never hear a refreshing argument for the reason and the protection of personal protection of the individual, whether it's constitutional or not, immaterial. And you never hear at the same time, an argument why our government is so anti-personal carry of guns, here in the United States. But we love to make bombs and missiles and drones and high-powered rifles and automatic rifles and machine guns, you name it, and ship them around the world so they can kill as many people as they want because we're going to sell them the ammo for it.
Absolutely.
We couldn't be more disingenuous. How people can look at the United States as saying, oh, there's a peaceful nation, there's a free nation, this is where I want to go. I wouldn't want to, if I was outside the United States, I would not want to come in the United States. I would pick some place. I don't know where it would be, but it wouldn't be the United States.
Well, and if you look at the polling data in foreign countries, if you ask people in foreign countries what the biggest threat to world peace and stability is, the largest answer that will come back is the United States. So I think people do see the hypocrisy. They do see that our government is really just kind of a giant can of gasoline dumping flammable liquid on sparks and fires all over the world. And I couldn't agree with you anymore. It's extremely frustrating. When we have a guy in the White House right now who ran on more than any other issue, he ran as the so-called peace candidate, and we now have more wars than we had before he was elected. We've got drone strikes in more countries. He brags about it, talks about how good he is at killing people. I don't know how, and this is, again, no endorsement of the Republican Party. I've got no time for the Republican Party, but at least they're honest. At least they're a bunch of warmongering scoundrels, and they don't apologize for it. Whereas it seems like with Democrats, they seem to like to talk about peace and oppose war until it's one of their guys that's starting the war, and then suddenly they're quiet, or oftentimes actually, fully in favor of the war that's being waged. I think trying to understand the thinking of your average Republican or Democrat is that alone's enough to drive you crazy. It's just a hodgepodge of contradictions and inconsistencies and sort of a philosophy that, well, for lack of a better word, a philosophy that is mind-numbing.
Yeah, I mean, they never come out with something substantive. It's like me saying, Scott, I am absolutely faithful to my life, 100% faithful. If you don't believe me, ask my girlfriend. I mean, that's the way they talk. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. I'm getting to the point where I'm not a teenager anymore. I'm on the other side of the fence, and I go, I don't know how much more I can take of this. I don't know if this stuff is going to kill me earlier than I should die, or is going to make me live longer. But it sure keeps me going. Now, in your book, the Second Amendment and the rights to keep and bear arms, the freedom and security, the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms.
Excuse me.
What are some of your solutions? I mean, other than shutting me up so you can talk, you know, what are some of your solutions to this thing? You know,
far more entertaining than I am, Joe. Well, I think that one of the things that we talk about at the Future of Freedom Foundation a lot is the power of ideas. So I guess first and foremost, the solution has to be that those of us who advocate for liberty and a free society have got to keep promoting these ideas in any way that we can. And I think you're doing a wonderful job of that through Liberty Talk Radio. We do that by writing. We do that by talking to our neighbors and our friends, by posting stories on Facebook. The book wasn't so much an attempt to provide solutions. It was more of a desire to provide people with a look at the value that an armed society brings, or the value that being armed brings to society. Right. There's a long history stretching all the way back to the Germanic tribes of Germany of individuals being armed, the right and the duty to be armed, the importance of being armed, both for the protection of yourself, your family, your community. Within the history of our own country, there's no shortage of examples of people that have used firearms, both individually and collectively. There's a lot of angst at the moment. There's over the issue of policing and minority communities in this country. I would like to see, and I didn't go into this in the book, but I would like to see the police departments in these cities completely disbanded. I would like to see their unions disbanded, their departments disbanded. Any contracts that have been made with these departments or the individuals within them should be voided, and we should start from scratch. And I think one of the things that might be considered is that we allow these communities to perhaps start policing themselves. And one of the ways we can do that is by lifting the restrictions on individuals arming themselves for their own protection. Right now in Cleveland, the Republican National Convention is going on in a state which has an open carry law. It's completely legal to openly carry a firearm. And from the news stories that I'm reading, there's no shortage of people that are making use of this law. The pictures and the stories are coming in all over the place of people that are walking around Cleveland openly carrying. It's going to be interesting to see if we can get through this convention without a bloodbath, which, according to the anti-gunners, should be happening any second now. Right. I wonder if perhaps we're going to see more commentators that are going to be wondering if perhaps this open carry of firearms might not have been in itself a discouragement to those who would commit crimes against other people. And if that's the case, maybe we should start considering that in the communities that are experiencing the worst crime rates in this country. And also, I can't not talk about an important piece of our own history, which is our own civil rights movement. The civil rights, to listen to the comic book version of American history taught in our public schools and repeated by no shortage of people, that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person. Martin Luther King swooped in on a white horse. The federal government gave him their full support, and today we have the racial utopia that you see around you. Well, obviously we can all, anybody with a bit of sense and a willingness to read a few books can see that's a completely inaccurate, or at least it's only at best half the story of the civil rights movement. There was armed groups that were protecting protest marches. There were armed groups that were fighting against the KKK, having shootouts with the KKK, that were threatening local government officials who were supporting the KKK, who were threatening local police officers and telling them, you need to stop supporting the KKK, or you need to stop letting these firemen turn their hoses on our young kids that are protesting, and if you don't, we're going to shoot you. So there was there's a huge part of the civil rights movement in this country that is ignored by people, I think, for political convenience. which shows that it's armed citizens, whether acting individually or collectively, that have contributed every bit as much as those who advocate for peace and nonviolence, that have brought about the change that we see today. Now, that said, the final goal of so many of these people was a more unified and society, one where people of different races could get along better, and that is certainly, as we see around us, not the case. We have a lot of tension between blacks and whites, between blacks and Hispanics, and of course that the latter, or that second one doesn't get a lot of mention. But there is a lot of tension between races in this country, and I think in a large part that comes about through policing. And perhaps it's time that we can reconsider the way that we're policing ourselves or being policed, the way that we're allowing policemen to conduct themselves within these communities. And we should maybe perhaps allow the people within those communities to maybe take a larger role in doing that for themselves.
Yeah. I've told the story so many times, I'm sure my listeners are tired of hearing it, but, back in Harlem and in Bronx, I sang doo-wop. I was always on a doo-wop group, and I still treasure those days. And one group I was in was the first fully integrated singing group. The Puerto Ricans had their groups. They're very good, by the way. The blacks had their groups, and they were fantastic, and the whites had theirs. We were never as good as the Puerto Ricans or the blacks, I'll be honest with you. And but I had the first fully integrated group. My lead was Freddie, he was a black guy, and the second tenor was a Puerto Rican. We got along great. I mean, I never had a problem. You know what I had a problem with? I had a problem with the whites that wanted to beat the hell out of me because I didn't belong to their gang in my neighborhood. So we have to make we make our own lives. We make maybe when you come back, we'll talk a little bit more on another program on all of this racial tension within the inner cities that we hear about, and really what the solutions are. But we have about one more minute. I'd like to leave that minute with you, okay, if you want to wrap things up, please.
Oh, wow. No pressure there, huh? No, I mean, I hope people that are listening to this go out and they read my book, Freedom and Security, the Second Amendment and the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. It's available on Amazon. I think you'll see in there a lot of arguments for the right to keep and bear arms, a lot of history about the way people in this country have used their right to keep and bear arms to protect themselves, to create change within society, to fight down those oppressive and repressive forces that would oppose change and would like to see people so-called, quote unquote, kept in their place. And we need to remember that disarming law-abiding people is never going to result in a more peaceful society. We need to keep that in mind. We need to each be responsible for ourselves, and there's no way to better express your individuality and your desire to uphold your own dignity and your own rights than ensuring that you are armed and able to protect yourself from some thug.
Yeah, people don't break into houses where they know the people are gun owners for a very simple reason. They don't want to die.
That's right.
That's very simple, Scott,
nobody robs a gun show.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, nobody ever robs a gun show.
That's right. I've been to dozens and dozens of gun shows. I've never heard a shot go off. Amazing.
Hi.
Scott, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today, and we apologize for the late start, but we're glad everything gets started. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You're a tremendous guest, and we do hope that you will accept our invitation to return at a later date.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Okay, Scott, thank you so much. Folks, this is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for their financial support. We'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends. Let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. This is Joe Cristiano. Stay well. Stay tuned.